The quiet cracks. They had been married for 60 years when the silence finally became loud enough to hear.
Ameen sat on the edge of the veranda chair, watching the late afternoon sun stretch long shadows across the garden. The rose plant he had planted decades ago was still alive, though it bloomed less generously now, much like everything else in their life. Inside the house, the ticking of the old wall clock echoed through the hallway. It had once annoyed him. Now it comforted him. At least something was still keeping time. Zainab was in the kitchen, washing cups that were already clean. She did this every evening, not because they needed washing, but because standing still made her think, and thinking hurt. They had not argued that day. They hadn't argued in weeks. But the absence of arguments was not peace. It was something colder, quieter, more dangerous. People often asked them their secret. 60 years? Mashallah. What's the key to a long marriage? Zainab would smile politely. Ameen would nod. One of them would say, Saber, patience. But patience, when misunderstood, becomes silence. And silence, when repeated daily, becomes distance. When they first married, the house had been loud. Too loud. Their children's laughter bounced off the walls. The radio played endlessly. Neighbors came unannounced. Zainab complained that she never had a moment to herself, and Ameen complained that he never found his socks. Back then, small habits seemed harmless. Ameen had a habit of not listening fully. Not because he didn't care, but because he always thought there would be time later. Zainab had a habit of not asking twice. If she felt ignored once, she retreated quietly. In the early years, it didn't matter. Life was busy. Forgiveness came easily. Love covered the gaps. But habits don't stay small forever. They repeat. They deepen. They settle into routine. That afternoon, Zainab placed 2 cups of tea on the tray. She hesitated before carrying it outside. She already knew how this would go. She would place the cup beside Ameen. He would say, "Thank you," without looking up. He would sip, lost in his thoughts. She would sit across from him, waiting for a comment that never came. Still, she carried the tray. "Chai," she said softly. "Thank you," Ameen replied, eyes fixed on the garden. Zainab sat down. Silence. She waited. Nothing. Years ago, she would have said something, anything. The roses need pruning. "Did you hear what our son said yesterday?" My knees are hurting again. But she had learned that conversations with no listeners eventually stop, so she said nothing. Ameen noticed the silence but misunderstood it. He thought, she seems peaceful today. He didn't realize peace doesn't feel heavy in the chest. Ameen had his own habits too. Every time Zainab spoke softly, he assumed it wasn't important. Every time she sighed, he assumed it was tiredness. Every time she stopped sharing, he assumed she had nothing left to say. What he never assumed was that she felt alone, sitting right in front of him. That night they lay on opposite sides of the bed, separated by a space wide enough to hold 60 years of unspoken words. Zainab stared at the ceiling. She remembered the first time she had felt invisible. It was small, almost silly. She had told Ameen about a neighbor who insulted her. She had waited for anger, for defense, for comfort. Instead, he had said, "You worry too much." He didn't mean harm. He was tired, busy, distracted. But something inside her had quietly cracked. She never told him how deeply that sentence stayed with her. Ameen, meanwhile, stared at the dark. He felt something was wrong, but couldn't name it. He believed love meant providing, staying, not leaving. He didn't know love also meant noticing. Noticing when your partner stops complaining. Not because things are better, but because they've given up. Over the years, their habits continued. Zainab stopped correcting him when he forgot anniversaries. Ameen stopped asking what was wrong when she went quiet. Each thought they were being kind. Each thought they were avoiding conflict. But what they were really avoiding was connection. The next morning, Ameen found Zainab sitting alone at the dining table staring at an old photograph. It showed them in their 20s, smiling, leaning into each other. So close they looked like one person. For a moment, something stirred in him. He almost said, "We were happy." Instead, he said, "Breakfast is getting cold." Zainab nodded and stood up. Another missed moment. Another habit reinforced. That day, neither of them knew this was only the beginning of something they could no longer ignore. Because small habits don't destroy relationships loudly. They destroy them daily, quietly, slowly. And once you finally notice the damage, you're often standing in the ruins, wondering when the collapse began. When silence turns into resentment. The silence did not arrive suddenly. It crept in day by day, disguised as maturity, patience, and letting things go. Ameen and Zainab had mastered the art of coexistence. They shared meals, shared a house, shared a history, but they no longer shared themselves. That morning, Zainab woke up before Fajr, as she had for most of her life. Her joints ached, especially her hands. She flexed her fingers slowly, waiting for the stiffness to ease. The pain was not new, but what bothered her more was that she'd stopped mentioning it. Years ago, she would have said, "My hands hurt today," and Ameen might have replied, "It's the cold," not unkind, not caring either. So she stopped saying it. Pain, like words, becomes heavier when carried alone. Ameen woke up later than usual. Retirement had softened his sense of urgency, but not his habits. He noticed Zainab wasn't in the room and assumed she was already busy in the kitchen. She always was. He never questioned how much effort it took anymore. When he entered the dining room, he found her sitting quietly, staring at the wall clock. "You didn't wake me," he said. Zainab looked at him. "You were sleeping, that was it." No tone, no accusation. But underneath those words was a lifetime of, "You never wake for me." Ameen sat down, unaware that something so small had meaning. Resentment rarely announces itself. It builds from unacknowledged moments. Moments like when Zainab had stopped telling Ameen about her fears, about aging, about becoming dependent, about dying before him or after him. Moments like when Ameen stopped sharing his disappointments, about feeling useless now that he no longer worked, about missing respect, about feeling invisible to his own children. They both felt unseen, but neither wanted to admit it, because admitting it would mean facing a painful truth. We are lonely together. That afternoon, their eldest son called. "Abba, we're thinking of selling the old house," he said casually. Ameen frowned. "Selling?" "Yes, it's too big now. You and Ami can move in with us." Ameen glanced at Zainab, expecting a reaction. She remained silent. He assumed that meant agreement. It didn't. Zainab felt something tighten inside her chest. That house was not just walls. It was her youth, her sacrifices, her memories. Every corner held a piece of her life. She wanted to say, "Ask me what I want," but she didn't. She smiled faintly and kept quiet. After the call ended, Ameen said, "It makes sense. Less work for you, as if her entire existence had been reduced to managing space. That was the moment resentment finally found a voice inside her. Not loud, sharp. That evening, Zainab cleaned the cupboard where she kept old letters. Letters she had written but never sent. Complaints she had swallowed. Feelings she had buried. She read one written 35 years ago. "I wish you would listen without fixing everything. I wish you would just sit with me." She folded the letter and placed it back. Some wishes expire if left unanswered too long. Ameen, on the other hand, sat alone in the veranda, replaying the conversation with his son. He felt uneasy. Something about Zainab's silence had felt heavier than usual. For the first time in years, he asked himself a dangerous question. What if she is unhappy because of me? He dismissed it quickly. They had survived too much together. Children, illness, financial struggles. Surely, love like that doesn't disappear. What he didn't realize was that love doesn't disappear. It erodes when neglected. Later that night, Zainab finally spoke. Not loudly, not angrily. Telling them to sell the house without asking me, that hurt. Ameen looked surprised. "I didn't think you'd mind." There it was. Another assumption. "I always mind," she said quietly. "I just stopped saying it." That sentence landed between them like a crack of thunder. Ameen felt defensive. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Zainab's eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic, not overflowing. Just tired. "Because every time I did, it felt like it didn't matter." Silence followed. This one was different. Heavy. Exposed. Ameen wanted to respond, to explain, to defend himself. Instead, he felt something unfamiliar. Regret. He thought of how many times he had brushed off her words, how often he had chosen comfort over connection. He had believed that avoiding conflict was love, but love avoided had turned into resentment endured. "I didn't know," he said finally. Zainab shook her head slowly. "You didn't ask." That night, sleep didn't come easily. Resentment has a way of replaying old scenes with new clarity. Zainab remembered all the times she had chosen silence to keep peace. Ameen remembered all the times he had mistaken silence for contentment. Both realized the same painful truth. Small habits had taught them how to slowly disconnect. The next morning, Zainab woke up with a heaviness she couldn't shake. Not anger, not sadness. Acceptance. And acceptance, when it arrives too late, is dangerous. She folded her prayer mat carefully and sat on the bed. "Ameen," she said, "do you ever wonder who we would have been if we had talked more?" The question terrified him, because he didn't know the answer, and for the first time in 60 years, he feared that time, his most trusted companion, had quietly become his enemy. Because resentment doesn't shout, it waits, and when it finally speaks, it asks questions that cannot be undone. The moment everything almost ended resentment had finally been spoken aloud. And once spoken, it refused to return to silence. The days that followed felt unfamiliar to both Ameen and Zainab. Not tense, not loud, but exposed, like a house where the walls were still standing, yet every crack was suddenly visible. Zainab moved more slowly now, not because her body demanded it, but because her heart was tired. Ameen noticed it. For the first time in years, he noticed her pauses, her deep breaths, the way she stared at nothing for a few seconds before continuing with simple tasks. Noticing, however, did not mean knowing what to do. One afternoon, Ameen found Zainab in the spare room, packing old clothes into a suitcase. The sight struck him like a physical blow. "Why are you packing?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Zainab didn't look up. "I'm organizing." He didn't believe her. "Organizing for where?" She folded a shawl carefully. "Our son's house, if we move." The words were neutral, but the act wasn't. For Zainab, this wasn't about moving. It was about leaving a life where she had slowly disappeared. Ameen felt panic rise in his chest. "We haven't decided anything yet." She finally looked at him. "Decisions have been made without me my whole life." That sentence cut deeper than any argument ever had. That night, something inside Ameen broke open. He sat alone in the living room, surrounded by furniture that had witnessed their entire marriage. He remembered moments he had never thought important. The times Zainab had waited for him to come home just to talk, and he had chosen sleep. The times she had shared worries, and he had dismissed them as overthinking. The times she had gone quiet, and he had felt relieved instead of concerned. He realized something devastating. He hadn't been cruel. He had been careless. And carelessness, stretched over 60 years, becomes cruelty. The next morning, Ameen tried something new. He waited. When Zainab entered the kitchen, he didn't speak immediately. He watched her make tea with trembling hands. "Your hands are hurting," he said. Zainab froze. It was such a small observation, but it landed like a confession. "Yes," she replied softly. "They have been for a long time." "I didn't know." "I know." That response hurt more than anger ever could. Later that day, Zainab slipped in the bathroom. It wasn't a dramatic fall. No broken bones. But when Ameen heard the sound and rushed in, fear overtook him. She was sitting on the floor, shaking, not from pain, but from shock. He knelt beside her, his hands unsteady. "Are you okay?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she didn't try to hide them. As he helped her up, something shifted. Fear has a way of cutting through habits. Choosing each other before time runs out. The suitcase remained by the bedroom door. It wasn't packed fully. It wasn't unpacked either. It stood there like a question neither Ameen nor Zainab wanted to answer too quickly. That morning, Zainab woke up earlier than usual. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to Ameen's breathing. For decades, that sound had meant safety. Lately, it had felt distant, familiar yet unreachable. She wondered how two people could share a lifetime and still feel like strangers. When Ameen woke up and saw the suitcase, his chest tightened. But he didn't say anything. For the first time, he understood that rushing words was one of the habits that had brought them here. Instead, he said softly, "Let's have breakfast together. Not I'm hungry. Not hurry up. Together." Zainab noticed. At the table, they sat across from each other, sunlight spilling between them. Ameen cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what you said, about feeling invisible." Zainab looked down at her cup. She had said those words once, and they had cost her courage. "I don't want to be remembered as the man who stayed but never showed up," Ameen continued. "If you leave, I'll understand. But if you stay, I don't want us to survive anymore. I want us to live." Zainab felt tears rise, not from pain this time, but from something dangerous. Hope. Hope, she knew, was risky, because hope without change is just another disappointment waiting to happen. "I don't need grand gestures," she said quietly. "I needed small things. Listening, asking, not deciding my life without me." Ameen nodded. "I know, and I know I can't undo 60 years, but I can show up today." That word again. Today, not tomorrow, not someday. Today, they decided to start small, painfully small. That afternoon, Ameen sat with Zainab while she rested. He didn't turn on the television. He didn't check his phone. He didn't fall asleep. He simply sat. Zainab noticed the effort immediately. It felt awkward, but it felt real. Days passed. The suitcase stayed where it was. Zainab began speaking again, not all at once, not easily, but honestly. She spoke about her fears of aging, of becoming dependent, of dying without ever feeling truly known. Ameen listened. Sometimes he wanted to interrupt. Sometimes he wanted to explain. But he remembered what she had said years ago in that unsent letter. "I wish you would just sit with me." So he did. That evening, Zainab said something she had never allowed herself to think aloud. "I don't want to grow old feeling invisible." The words hung in the air. Ameen felt them settle into his chest. I don't want that either, he admitted. But I think I helped make it that way. Zainab looked at him, surprised. An admission. After 6 decades, it felt like a door cracking open. Still, old habits don't surrender easily. The following days were awkward. Ameen tried to ask questions, but didn't always know how. Zainab tried to answer honestly, but years of restraint made her cautious. Healing felt uncomfortable, unnatural. They were better at silence than conversation. One evening, Zainab didn't come to dinner. Ameen found her sitting on the bed, staring at her wedding jewelry. I was thinking, she said slowly, maybe it's too late. For what? He asked, though he already knew. For us. The fear he had avoided for years finally stood in front of him. Is that what you want? He asked. She shook her head. I don't know what I want anymore. That uncertainty frightened him more than anger ever had. That night, Ameen did something he had never done before. He spoke without fixing. I was raised to believe love means staying, providing, enduring. Zainab listened. No one taught me how to listen, he continued, or how to notice when someone feels alone beside me. His voice cracked. I thought time would cover my mistakes. Zainab whispered, Time only covers what you face. For the first time in years, they cried together. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, the way their marriage had unraveled. The next morning, Zainab packed the suitcase again, but this time, Ameen sat beside her. Are you leaving? He asked. She paused. I'm giving us space to decide. That word, space, terrified him, yet he understood. Love that suffocates needs distance. Love that fades needs effort. As Zainab zipped the bag, Ameen said something he had never said before. Stay. Not because of habit, not because of history. Stay because I am willing to learn you again. Zainab looked at him for a long time. 60 years passed between them in that moment. She didn't answer. Because sometimes the most important moments don't end with certainty. They end with a choice waiting to be made. And in that waiting, everything they had ever been hung in fragile balance. One evening, Ameen confessed something of his own. I feel useless since I stopped working, he said. I feel like I lost my place. Zainab reached for his hand. She hadn't done that in a long time. You were never only your job, she said. You just never let yourself be anything else. That night, they laughed softly at old memories. Not because everything was healed, but because healing had finally begun. The real test came a week later. Their son called again. We found a buyer, he said. We need an answer. Ameen looked at Zainab. This time he didn't speak first. Zainab felt the weight of the moment and the difference. I don't want to leave this house, she said. Not yet. Ameen nodded. Then we won't. No debate, no convincing, just respect. When the call ended, Zainab realized something profound. It wasn't the decision that mattered. It was being asked. That night, she unpacked the suitcase, slowly, deliberately, not as surrender, but as choice. She placed it back in the cupboard and closed the door. Some things are meant to stay packed. Others are meant to be faced. Weeks turned into months. Not every day was good. They still misunderstood each other. Old habits tried to return, but now they noticed, and noticing changed everything. Ameen began asking, How are you really? Zainab began answering, even when it was uncomfortable. They learned that love doesn't die from one big mistake. It dies from thousands of small ones, and it can be saved the same way. One afternoon they sat on the veranda again, watching the sun set over the garden. The rose plant bloomed. Not fully, but enough. Ameen smiled. Do you think we wasted too much time? Zainab thought for a moment. Yes, she said honestly. But not all of it. He nodded. What matters, she continued, is that we noticed before the end. Ameen reached for her hand. This time she didn't hesitate. People would still ask them their secret. And now Zainab answered differently. We stopped letting small habits speak louder than love. Because in the end, relationships don't collapse in a single moment. They fade when people stop choosing each other, daily. And they survive when two people, even after 60 years, decide to begin again, together.